even if you all decide to not directly implement something just like the person said, they would appreciate the fact that you listen to them
Hmm.
and you communicated on, hey, this is what we're doing and the why, and this is why we're not doing what you mentioned at the moment, but here's why. And
Hmm.
people can live with that. And for every person that's voicing a concern, there's probably 10 other people that have that same perception that are not voicing it. And so
Bingo.
and
Yeah.
so if you're able to correct and connect with people who on the far side of disagreement, it's much easier to connect with everybody else.
Welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites. And I have two very special guests. And um, both of them, in fact, all of us, we work together at Sutter Health. But it's so funny. You two have a backstory, and I want you to be able to share it. So I'll start off with Sergio. Sergio Vincenti is service line executive, medical and surgical services at Sutter Medical Foundation at Sutter Health. And then you can see the uh, background or the wallpaper in the background. And then Vaughn Williams is still, and the last time I had you on the podcast, it was a newer role for you, Vaughn, but COO at Cedar, it's at Cedar Hill Regional Medical Center, and that's
Yep.
back on the East Coast. So Sergio and I are in California, and then Vaughn is no longer in California. He left us to go back closer to home. So this week we're going to talk about just leadership and the evolution of leadership. And you two have a journey to go through. And so one of the things that stood out when we were going through that is leading through change means being well, I'm going to start off with a different one, I guess, because I started reading a different one here. effective leaders effective leaders don't just manage change, they inspire others to see the opportunity within it, transforming uncertainty into growth. And what kicked this off, Sergio, I know you made a comment before we hit record about the history of leadership, and there's that standard core stuff. But the reality of it is, and we're talking 2024, and I think 2024 actually started back in 2020 when COVID hit,
Mhm.
where we kind of blew up the definition of leadership and added a bunch more to it. So that's kind of it, is that the word of the day is change and stepping into stuff. And I think you called it out as being agile. And so that's kind of the place that it would be kind of cool to start with the two of you. And so Vaughn, I would love to hear from you first because you've got a backstory around Sergio, and then we can have a conversation a little bit more. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I just want to give Sergio his kudos and his flowers. So many people may not know, but Sergio and I both worked at Sutter Health for part of Medical Foundation, and he was in a director of strategic initiative role, and he got the chance to move up and get promoted to another great opportunity. And I took his role, and so there was big shoes to fill for Sergio at that time, and I'm sure this still is the case. Sutter Health greatly appreciate the great work that Sergio has done, and he took the time and still does. I know if I give him a call or text to help me or spend time with me as he did right after my fellowship in my early 20s. And so hats off to you, Sergio. I'm happy to be on the platform with you, my man, and excited to connect with you here. Thanks.
I love it. So Vaughn, what comes to mind for you on leadership and like what style of leadership you're at? Because some of the pre-conversation that we had is, what is it like to lead today? Where from the position you're in, you're a COO at a hospital system on the East Coast, and what's different? What's different with you? What have you noticed? What are you having to step into that maybe wasn't the usual thing to step into from before?
Yeah, a couple things for me. One, we're building a new hospital and we're building truly integrated health system in a new area for my company. And so there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of uncertainty. So part of it feels like a startup in a way, right? We don't have our team yet. Everybody's doing a little bit of everything. A lot of people have opinions, and those are great too. And we incorporate those when we can. But it's quite different than a director role, as I mentioned before, at a large health system that is established in the area, and you're kind of plug and play in a way. And so it's been great, but also it's been challenging, right? And at times, and there's no, as you all know, in leadership, there's no 9 to 5, right? Or there's no, hey, you complete these 3 things and you're done for the week. It's get the hospital open and do anything and everything we need to done. That's moral and ethical, of course, to get
Yeah.
the job done. And so what I've learned is truly the only thing constant is change.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as you move up, there's less layers of people behind you, and so that's good because you have more autonomy to do different things as you see fit. But it's also challenging because you have more autonomy to do different things as you see fit, and you take all the risk and all the challenges that comes with that, and it's less people that you can ask for help. And so I think with that, you have to still find your and leverage your mentors and your sponsors and your experts and still find ways to take your ego out and ask for help when needed. But it's been interesting nonetheless. But again,
Yeah.
once in a lifetime opportunity that I'm privileged to be a part of.
Yeah, it's so funny. I have to laugh because when you said there's fewer and fewer people to ask for help, it depends how you're defining help. Okay. And I had a feeling that you were going to help of there's less and less people that I can go to for advice and
Yeah.
guidance,
Yep.
right? Because there's plenty of people to help you,
Yeah.
right? And help the work. But it's like to your point, you get to a certain point, and I remember with me when I became like a parent and the adult, and I thought, am I ready to be that person in the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of it when you get to a certain level of leadership. It's like, okay, so I'm it. I'm looking around. It's like there's no one else to tag in.
Yep.
So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Sergio, how about you? What thoughts do you have about that and where can you relate? Because I saw you smiling.
Yeah. No, no, and thanks, Michelle, for hosting us today. It's a privilege to be on with you and Vaughn. I think your talent was visible early on, and no surprise that your career has been as successful as it is. So good to see you as always. But yeah, I mean, I think Michelle, really, for me, it comes down to, the leaders. The leaders have that obligation to simplify the complex for our
Mm-hmm.
teams and translate it into meaningful pieces of information and action. And at Sutter, there's a very aggressive growth strategy that we're embarking on to the tune of $800 million worth of ambulatory growth buildings in the next several years. And so, how do we take a strategy that's complicated, that is as complicated as that and as fast pace, and whittle it down to how is this going to impact our clinic supervisors, our frontline teams, our
Mm-hmm.
managers, our directors, and our physician leaders, and ensure that they feel supported, that they understand the change. So for me, it's really about taking like highly complex, sometimes controversial
Mm-hmm.
issues, and really packaging in a way to help our leaders, our frontline leaders, understand the why, so that they can feel empowered to share that message to the frontline or to their stakeholders.
Yeah, Vaughn, you're shaking your head because I'm like Sergio, what you're talking about, there's some startup elements to that, right? Because when you've got that rapid expansion, because Vaughn, it's the same thing with you. You're building a new hospital, right? So you're still you both are similar places of expanding. And what you're doing and when you're expanding is you're not going to repurpose people. You're not going to take people to your point at the front line and go, okay, so you're going to work at both these clinics now, or it's not going to happen that way. And so you've literally got to create new teams, and then you've also got to get people comfortable with what does that growth look like to where it's not freaking people out. And it's the same thing with a new hospital. You may have some people that go, pick me, I want to be in the new stuff. And then you've got other people that are like, they're worried about change because part of their team could be leaving. What does this mean for the organization? And there's a lot of risk when you talk about growth at that level. There's a lot of risk because it's a huge investment, like when you're expanding a hospital. So how do you do it? What comes to mind for either one of you that stands out aside from, yes, the key messaging is important, but there's so much work that happens before, hi, we're going to cascade down messaging to empower leaders to have better conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, uh, it's the importance of transparent and open communication. Because as you mentioned, some people are excited because that means more opportunity for them, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll happen like that. And there may be times, whether here and other organizations I've been at, where on paper there may be more opportunity, but in reality doesn't end up being more opportunity for them for whatever reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think it's important to not overpromise. and at the same time be transparent and be open to have those hard conversations if needed early on rather than later. I think too, it goes back to what we've talked about before, Michelle, is truly building symbiotic relationships with individuals, and through that you understand their why, right? You understand what makes them tick. You understand where they're at in terms of career growth or closer retirement or somewhere in between. And so when you have that foundation, when these new opportunities come up, you can leverage that and leverage that relationship to work with them to create the best next step that both serves them in the right way, but also serves the organization. And so those are the couple of things that come to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because part of it is if you haven't had the conversations on the front end of it, you don't know where they sit, where they stand, what's on their mind. And so you could end up making some really poor assumptions about, who do you have in line to going on? And, how do you do like succession planning if you really haven't had those conversations with people? And you may think you've got a resource that they go, yeah, no, I'm out. Yeah, just tag me, I'm out. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Sergio, you made a comment about, and it's interesting because I was doing the bobblehead when you said, as a leader, we need to make the simplify the complex. How do you do that? I mean, seriously, how do you, I know what my approach is on some stuff, but I'm curious for people looking at it going, it's a really nice phrase, but there's a lot of work involved in doing that. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's taking parts of the message and tailoring it to your audience. And so if you're talking about, for example, a particular, care team or team that's going to be impacted by a change that the organization is considering, it's really, I think the focus is really around bringing it back to the patient and how we're moving forward with changes that may seem uncomfortable or that are difficult or controversial, but for the benefit of our patients. And we actually literally went through this where we needed several hundred staff to change their location of where they park because patients were either no showing to their appointment or completely late, which was creating further frustration. So in a big strategy about relocating a bunch of staff who have to park, 2 miles down versus where they're currently parking, it really ultimately comes down to our patients struggle to find parking. They're coming to see this, and we can't take care of them because we're creating a barrier for them. So I really think it comes down to tailoring that message, and then also being frank and transparent with people so that they can ask the questions and get clear messaging and have a clear understanding of why something's happening. But for me, it really comes down to communicating the why. And I think if you simplify it down to that, even if people disagree with it will at least help them understand why something is happening.
Yeah, it's interesting because I go through ADKAR, and I know both of you have been exposed to ADKAR, ProSci's ADKAR, so awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And and I'm just explaining for people that don't, because I know ADKAR so well, and I love it because it's so intuitive. But it comes down to that, because the thing is, the why part of it, Sergio, is that we're gonna hit the brain on part of it, right? So intellectually, the brain's gonna go, okay, yeah, they've at least thought about this. The desire piece is we need to get it down to our heart, to where we're going to make the decision to personally step in and support the change. I think one of the things that stood out for me that really did, that you talked about, it's not just about cascading this message down to people in the organization going, my work here is done, right? It's about creating that feedback loop, like you said. What's the forum that people can surface their issues and getting their questions answered? And I think a lot of times when change happens, because I've seen it with other organizations, that it's done not so well. That they go around and they go, I don't understand what happened. And literally one leader that I coach, they didn't even have the leaders involved there with conversations with other humans just to get feedback. And it was pretty significant changes. Their process was HR cascaded down messages on behalf of the leader. So there were no personal conversations. Do you think that went well? No.
No, not at
It
all.
was an uproar. And these are large organizations that are still thinking, yeah, this is a good plan. On what planet?
Yeah, because it may feel easier, right? It may be
It-
quicker in time initially, right? But what you realize when you do it, quote unquote, wrong, you spend 10 times more of that time on the back end
Mhm.
to reestablish relationships,
Yeah.
to have conversations, so on and so forth. So it's about having
Mhm.
those tough conversations early on to save
Yeah.
time and save people energy in the long run.
It's so funny.
And
It's like you go slow to go fast, right? In a process improvement world. And so one of those things is you can do it the way that you two are talking about on the front end of it, create the forum that people can have conversations, or you can spend it on the back end trying to recover, right? And do service recover, if you will, with your people. And to your point, it's going to take a lot longer to do that. In the meantime, you're still marching to a timeline. To your point, it could be aggressive. I mean, you've got a real timeline with the hospital, Sergio, with the expansion you have going. These are real timelines. So spend the time on the front end of it to share with
yeah,
people. Here's what's going on. Give them more time to be able to navigate through their own change journey. Yeah.
and
And the
Michelle,
other part I don't want to skip over is both of you have to navigate your own change journey for yourselves.
Mhm.
So when
yeah,
you got the
absolutely.
information, Sergio, what did you have to go through? You know, it's like when you heard about this expansion, at first you thought, whoa, and then you got to wrap your brain around it.
Yeah, I thought it was exciting to initially to really be part of such a rapid expansion and
Mm-hmm.
growth for for patients and for our teams. And I think so that excitement still exists. And I would add the and is that we know this is gonna there's a lot ahead of us to make sure that these buildings are open successfully and ensuring that they're open on time and that we can recruit the physicians and do that whole punch list to get the
Mm-hmm.
building ready. So I think, and you're right, Michelle. It starts with the leader being committed in their own mind and heart about the change to help signal. Because if it's not there, that's you're starting from square zero.
Mm-hmm.
And to your earlier comment of spending that time up front with the change and communicating and the buy-in, there are many times I'm sure the three of us and others have had where even with that investment of time up front on that change, there is still going to be a kind of grief blowback session afterwards, particularly if it's very difficult, very controversial. But not having that communication upfront probably makes that second conversation even more difficult. So it's worth it's always worth that investment of time up front, even if you think the change will, rear its ugly head and create challenges and concern and anxiety for people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd remove the word probably. It
Yeah.
does make the conversation easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just remove the word probably. Yeah. Vaughn, what's your experience? How are you guys doing with the stuff that you're doing? Like you said, it feels like a startup. Do you have people? Because I imagine, here's what I imagine with both of you actually, is that to your point, Sergio, you heard about it and you're like, oh my God, this is so exciting. The rapid expansion. I can't wait to be a part. You're going to have people in your teams that go, I want to be a part of this. Right. And people that maybe you hadn't thought wanted to be a part of it. And then you've got other people you thought would be okay. And they're just like, later days. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm just going to keep my head in the sand and this too shall pass. So do you have people on your team that stepped up and you're like, whoa, okay. Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, we've been fortunate. So, we're building a new hospital, but not too far from the area that we're building a hospital that we have a prime great hospital in GW Hospital. And so we wouldn't be able to build our new facility without the great work of a lot of those leaders and staff who have day in and day out been dedicating their time not only to their main job, right, but this secondary opportunity. And so it's necessary, it's needed. People are generally excited about it because they are committed to the patients that are in that area, which I've shared with you before. Lifespan is 15 years different than 6 miles away.
Wow,
Still,
which is just crazy, by the way.
it
Can you,
is.
can
And
you
so,
say that again? And
yeah,
so people can really hear it. like you're serving a population like 6 miles away that, I mean, because that was when you and I talked before, I was like, whoa.
Yep. So Ward 8, where the hospital is being built at, the average life expectancy is 72 years. 6 miles away, the average life expectancy is 87 years. And so still in Washington, D.C., which isn't that big in itself,
No.
there's significant health disparities and delta and socioeconomic realities of the communities. And so the hospital that we're building is really just a part of help closing that gap, if you will, right? And so, again, I'm privileged, as I always say, I'm privileged to be a part of the team that's doing this. And so that gets people riled up, right? People are
Yeah.
excited about that, to have a role in that. And so we've been fortunate enough to have people commit and serve and work with us to get this facility open.
Yeah.
And we're still figuring out the right structure to serve not only the hospital, but the market as a whole. But as we do that, there's going to be some people that will have some great opportunities, and we'll have those conversations. And some people that it may not be the right time right now, but it may be opportunities down the line. Right. And so it's about, again, having transparent conversations and understanding timelines. And then, as Sergio mentioned, getting that feedback, getting their thoughts, but making sure people are doing it for the right reasons. And if they're not, having those conversations to make sure the reasons are aligned.
Yeah. Yeah. Either one of you, I'm curious, as we're talking about, because people could be listening going, it's easy for you to say, or have you always done it this way? Can you think back at a time that it didn't go so well, change, that you went through it? Because I think we learned from failures. I can remove the word think. We learned from failures. I don't think it. I know it to be true. Is there something that stands out for you that you went through something and you went, okay, and this is why I'm so certain that this is the way to do it?
Yeah. Many off the top of my head. I think the challenge is where do you pull from? Yeah, we a couple years ago we were going through just a number of clinic relocations within a Sutter Medical Foundation, and this was around the time the pandemic had hit. Our organization was struggling financially, and we were looking at non-labor ways to help reduce expense, i.e., looking at our utilization across the organization to determine, could we shed some lease expense and potentially consolidate some space. We had an opportunity in one of our geographies that impacted a number of clinics, and really the big opportunity and learning that came out was, after all these consolidation and clinic moves happened, was really we still it still wasn't apparent to people why. And on our perspective, we thought we had messaged the why from day one in one-on-one conversations, in communications with leaders, in communications with our physician leaders, and still even several years later after this change happened, there were still questions around, I'm not entirely clear why we had to switch clinic locations, and this personally impacted me as a physician. I changed the number of exam rooms. I changed my office. And so I think our lesson learned was that, you said it best, Michelle, like 5 to 7 times, 5 to 7 different ways. And we clearly fell short in that communication. And it was apparent probably after we started the work, and definitely after all the work was completed.
Yeah. Interesting when you say that, because I wonder if you went back, right, knowing what you know now, because part of the thing you called out was this Q&A forum, something to where people can raise issues. But what would you do differently aside from 5 to 7 times? If you look back on that and you go, you know what, that's the thing that we skipped over.
Yeah, I think the individual, the value and power of the individual conversation cannot be overstated. And so when you're sharing the message and the why on a meeting with 100 physicians and their leadership and your ops leadership, it's very different than pulling, meeting a physician for dinner to talk through their concerns with your diet partner. That's a very different way that kind of lowers the temperature and allows people to be professionally vulnerable and share the really like to get to common ground, right? So I think we would have done that much more in hindsight now with those high risk physicians who were significantly, you know, displeased or unhappy. We didn't rely on that strategy enough.
A really good call out, because when I think about it, it is those individual conversations. And the thing that calls that out to me is that when you said a meeting with 100 physicians on it, and my brain went to how many of them are actually paying attention,
right,
and not multitasking. Yeah, and so, and I tell people, and I've said this for a while, is that because people go, well, they were in the meeting, the virtual meeting, and I said, do realize that the only one in that meeting that hears everything being said is the person speaking?
right,
No one else does.
right.
They're not, they're getting pinged, they're all this other stuff. And so yeah, that's a really good call out, because you're really clear on the why now, and you're really clear on hearing back from people. And then when you've got those stakeholders that have more to risk, to lose, that are bigger impacted, and their voices are stronger voices, if you will, their perspectives matter more. Take the time on the front end of it. Yeah, I love the individual stuff, because not everyone's comfortable with, even if they are listening, speaking up in a group of their peers.
Right, and they can be your ambassadors too. So those louder voices can be influential leaders who help share the why and are really the change agents in the field, which is a blessing if you can get that. So
yeah, the Japanese, it was a term in, I don't know if you got taught this during lean management system, but it's nemawashi. And nemawashi is the meeting before the meeting, right? And so part of it is, if you're aware of these other people, meet with them beforehand to be able to hear that stuff before you come together, so that you're not blindsided too by some comments out of left field that the whole room hears what's going on. Yeah, it's a good call out. Vaughn, what about you? What's been your strategy and approach? Or actually, let's go back to the other. Do you remember any time that didn't work so well?
Yeah, you know, I do have plenty of Sergio shared too, right? I think a constant thing I'm thinking about as you get higher up in your career, you're further away from the front line. And so there's different layers between you and getting into front line. And so if you share a message directly to somebody who then shares a message to another level, it's kind of like a telephone game, right? And if you don't have structures in place, the message you intended to share may get convoluted or changed by the time it gets to the front line where you need it to be. And so as I think of past times that didn't go well, I think the communication could have been tighter. I think we could have had kind of standard kind of work or communication or talking points for leaders to have the same conversation with their staff. And I think the issue with the communication was that there was a lot of ambiguity, and when there's ambiguity, people create their own truth. And so though that was the big opportunity as I think about what we could have done differently, whether it was some roles being changed or eliminated, but in reality people can move it to different positions, right? But that wasn't communicated as strong. Or we're working on workforce optimization initiative to decrease turnaround time or a particular operational metric, but people's mind went to, okay, they're doing that, so then instead of having 10 people, I could do it with 5. But we had 20% vacancy, so we may not just need to fill the vacant positions, but everybody still has their role, right? And so those are the kind of things that I think we could have thought of differently, and then put structures and standard work in place to help mitigate those future issues.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and like earlier on bobbleheading, but I think the other thing that comes to mind too is provide training and education for the leaders at every level. So as we're cascading information down, right, that you're going to do with your team, right? And then you're going to have that conversation, your team that's going to meet with the next team. They all come together. and go, hey, this communication is going to be going out. But a lot of times what happens is it's just some level of a no-do share that gets sent out and people may or may not read it. We had a situation in another organization that we cascaded the communication out to the lead. They were senior leaders, not at the top of the house, but they were senior leaders. They weren't great at managing their inbox. And it was their responsibility to forward the message on to their people. It didn't get done. So it's that kind of stuff that it's like, be really clear on what it is and what that strategy is, and provide some training and education, because you have leaders, especially closer to the front line, that they don't know how to navigate through it. They don't know how to manage their own change journey before they get in front of their team. And like I've told people before, it's like, if you haven't wrapped your brain around it, Sergio, like you said you did, if you are not yet through desire, where you've made the personal commitment to step in and support the change, do not talk to your people. Don't do it, because there's no good that can come of that. So, but it's like, so how do we work with people to be able to set those expectations and then be able to create the platform that we can develop people to manage change? Because this is not an intuitive thing.
Agree.
No, it's not intuitive at all, and it is the leader's responsibility to help provide the resources or the toolkit for those leaders to help communicate and cascade the change down. I'd say the other piece is to add, and what do you need and how can I support you? There could be that organizational template, that no-do share, that manager FAQ. Great. Don't let that get lost in email, but it's, what questions do you have, or do you think your team will have? That's really powerful. And that starts, I think, the wheels turning for every layer of leadership, because when, a no-do share or something is written at a senior HR or senior level, they may not be anticipating questions from the frontline staff that frontline leaders are then going to get and are not appropriately armed or prepared to address.
Yeah.
So it's really, I think, twofold. Quite honestly, it's arm the leader with the information, so they have that awareness and desire, and it's, what else do you need to take this message forward and share?
Yeah.
And Sergio, to your point, I think when you do that, the leader then takes the change and says, hey, we're doing this because of XYZ to their staff, rather than we're doing this because Sergio is saying this, or this is Sergio's initiative, or the people up top are doing. It's a sense of onus, and I think once our leaders own it, it has a better chance of actually executing in your team.
Hands down. I mean, and when you look at it, it's like, I go back to experience of work surveys, right, that come out. And typically what you'll see, right, in certain parts, is that the people on a team love their manager, their direct manager, and they can't stand senior leadership. They're tanked, right? And it's like, because then you don't have a situation of people managing up. And it's to what you're talking about. It's like, okay, Sergio's making us do this again. Here we go. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't anything else. Versus the people are really clear on why this thing's happening, the impact of the organization, how it supports the mission, which is where you connect to the heart of people, especially in not-for-profit organizations, right? And you can bring it back to the patient or whatever else it may be. To your situation, Vaughn, is we're stepping into a community that these people have 15 years less of life on this earth than people that are 6 miles away. That you connect to heart. And I think what happens is we leave too much in the telephone game if we're not preparing people as we're cascading messages down. And to your point, both of your point, you could be well-intentioned as the leader thinking, hey, we got it and everything's great. And the question I would ask of you and others, right, is how do you know? How do you know that this stuff is landing as intended? How do you know that things haven't been like turned sideways as it gets cascaded down? And what do you need to do to put yourself in a position to find out?
Yeah, I think it comes down to asking those humble questions to validate, was it effective? And rounding and being on the floor and seeing the anticipated, is what you're expecting the actual outcome. And I also think there's an obligation there to create a just an environment of not just listening, but actually seeking feedback so that you can confirm and validate, was it effective? I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And to add, I think when you are asking the questions about, did the communication go well? Yes or no? Us as leaders, we have to take our egos out, right? We have to be open to hear, no, it didn't go well, and
Yeah,
here's why.
it sucked actually.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's not a negative reflection on us as people. It's just things that we have to do better as leaders. And just like anyone else, we're not perfect. And so I think in that constant mindset of improving the process and improving all of this to serve our patients in a sustainable way, it's much easier to take your ego, take your pride out of it, and in pursuit of perfection.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, seek it out, right? Because I think a lot of times it happens, to your point, is that you don't have a 9 to 5 job that's Monday through Friday. And so how do you intentionally calendar that time in? Because you need to be intentional about it to actually do the follow-up and find out, because otherwise it could just happen and you assume it's okay because you intended it to be okay. So yeah. Anyway, it's so cool to be in the room with both of you. I respect the time. It's so cool because I met both of you when you were just starting both of you at different times when you were just starting at Fellows. And I look at the two really amazing leaders that's sitting in front of me and I'm freaking blown away. So it's super cool stuff. So here's my last question for you. What 1 or 2 things do you want people to walk away with around this topic that we just talked about? And I'll start with Vaughn.
I think the 1 or 2 things I want people to take away from this is, as I said a little bit earlier, we're not perfect. And so in trying to execute this and communicate change appropriately, there are going to be misses. There are going to be opportunities that didn't go as planned. And those are great opportunities to learn from. So as you move forward to further refine this particular change, but also communicate future changes, we'll be better at it. And so I think that constant journey of improvement and leaving your pride at the door in that vein is important to have in this effort.
Yeah, thank you. I get the sense that you've had a little bit of experience with leaving your ego at the door.
For sure. For sure. Daily reminder.
I just have a feeling.
Daily.
Sergio, what about you?
Never stop listening and let your harshest critic, most vocal, kind of non-supporter in whatever initiative or change you're thinking, allow that to test your thinking and use it as now's the time to evaluate the process, the change. Are we missing something? What are we missing? And how do we mitigate that now? So use the critics. There could be an element in wisdom there that is underappreciated. And while it might be difficult to hear, it may save a lot of heartache in the end.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm smiling and totally agreeing with you because you need that voice. And a lot of times what happens, it's the one that's been a pain in your patoot forever, right? And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to hear it. But the reality of it is they've got a perspective. Every single human with a voice and an opinion has a perspective. And to your point, the higher up you get in the organization, the larger the changes that you're leading and supporting, you can't afford to not hear that perspective and that caution that they have, because you've got less visibility to all the different nuances and elements that are going on. So it's a huge call out. Yeah. Vaughn, do you have an opinion on that?
No, I totally agree.
Do you have loud voices that you've had that you're like, but yeah, I think that's it.
Definitely. No, I totally agree with Sergio. I've had loud voices, if you will. And it goes back to what Sergio mentioned. Even if you all decide to not directly implement something just like the person said, they would appreciate the fact that you listened to them and you communicated on, hey, this is what we're doing and the why and this is why we're not doing what you mentioned at the moment, but here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And people can live with that. And for every person that's voicing a concern, there's probably 10 other people that have that same perception that are not voicing it. And so
Yeah.
so if you're able to correct and connect with people who on the far side of disagreement, it's much easier to connect with everybody else. And so I totally agree with you, Sergio.
Yeah. The one thing you called out, and I think, Sergio, you mentioned earlier with change around get the feedback of what's going on. And my brain goes to that loop, right? That loop that you're doing. It's that loop too, when we're getting feedback, close it by letting people know we're doing this, we're not doing this, and why. Because I think a lot of times unintentionally we can fall short as leaders by not closing those loops as well, because there's so much going on. But yeah, thank you. And I know we're going to schedule another time and have some other people in the room. So this is not the last time I'm going to chat with the two of you, and that really excites me. So this has been Leadership Soundbites. Please like, share, subscribe with Michelle and Sergio and Vaughn. And until next time, have a really, really great day. Thank you.